the Honorable MP from Thiruvananthapuram, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, born in London, actually studied in St. Stephen's, Delhi, has a doctorate from the Tufts University Fletcher School of Diplomacy. I understand he was one of the youngest professors there as well. Served in the United Nations for 29 years and almost became the Secretary General, former Minister of State for HR and External Affairs, author, 19 books that he's written, contributed to the Indian Express, Newsweek, New York Times, you name it. And of course, his latest book is called Battle of the Belonging, released in October. So very, very happy that we had Dr. Shashi Tharoor. So I had the privilege of speaking to Dr. Shashi Tharoor recently. So let's hear what Dr. Shashi Tharoor has to say. Please. Honorable MP, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, thank you so much for making time this evening to come and see us. Your presence is really going to make a big difference for the audience. We have a whole lot of people. We are hoping it will be, between 6,000 and 10,000 people. We don't know exactly how many it is, but it's quite a number. I think we've crossed 6,000. So I'm sure you're going to be, enlightening all of them with what you have to say. I must tell you, you are our, how do I put it, star speaker. It goes without saying. But it really helped us with getting the participants, to come in. I don't think they were very much interested in just the UEF, but you coming in, I think has made all the difference. So thank you so much, Dr. Shashi, for making time to come and see us today. Just want to give you a quick, background about the UEF. We are a Chennai-based forum. About 450 members. We are hoping to take it to about 1,500 members soon. And quite simply put, our agenda is to see how we can support Tamil Nadu, South India, India to sort of, and our stakeholders grow at 1.5x. Quite simply put, somebody making 100 rupees, can we take it to 150? Somebody making 10,000, can we take it to 15,000? And, just sort of keeps going on and on. So that's our agenda in a nutshell. So without taking too much time, for the introductions. So let me just come straight into the topic of today's discussion, which is on top of everybody's mind, right? Uncertainty, pandemic, COVID, vaccine, Biden, Trump. I mean, you open the newspaper and it's like, that's it. First 3 pages are talking all about that. So I must sort of indulge you with that. So, new president in the White House. After, somebody said I shouldn't say turbulent years, but 4 years, whatever we want to call it.
Very turbulent years.
And then multiple vaccines coming in, I think we're now hitting upon so many vaccines coming in. So what do you think is in store? I mean, we've got a new president who's coming in on my birthday, January 20th.
Oh,
and
congratulations.
I believe he's got a fantastic lineup of cabinet members.
Yeah.
We've got, multiple vaccines coming up, and whatnot. So what's going to happen next year? What's your take? 2021, what's in store for us?
Well, I think that obviously the expectation with President Biden, President-elect Biden, is that it'll be a bit of a return to normal. That the turbulence, the impulsive 3 a.m. tweeting, the rather dramatic statements emerging from the man in the White House, the somewhat erratic policy actions, you bomb Syria one day, you forget about it the next, all of these things will subside and you'll have a very calm and mature hand at the helm of the leading superpower on the planet. And that's the expectation from the Biden side. But I would argue that while that's good, and it's good that America may not any longer be a source of geopolitical instability, some of the trends we have seen during this last year and during the 4 years of Trump are not going to disappear, Ahmed. I mean, certainly, I think there's no question that the rivalry between the US and China that intensified under Trump and that led during COVID, during the pandemic, to talk of decoupling and so on, has created a very different dynamic. And even if we are, it's always wrong to draw simple parallels with the Cold War again, like the one with the Soviet Union, because China and the US are far more closely imbricated into one another than the US and the Soviet Union ever were. nonetheless, something approaching, if not a Cold War, certainly not a war and peace, is going to follow. So that's going to be a very major defining geopolitical feature of the next few years. The larger concern that I would have is that I think what the pandemic seems to have given us is an irresistible movement towards deglobalization. I share your ambitions for Southern India, Tamil Nadu, growth and all of that. But if we were expecting to do that in the kind of context of the globalized economy that we took for granted from about 1991 in India from the reforms and 1918 in the rest of the world till about 2010, well, that I think is now pretty much gone, because the pandemic seemed to confirm for many that in times of crises, people rely on their governments to shield them. It showed people that global supply chains are vulnerable to disruption, therefore unsustainable, that dependence on foreign countries for essential goods like pharmaceuticals, or even the ingredients that go into making pharmaceuticals, can be really a problem. And therefore, many countries, you talked about the vaccines, look at the way in some of the richer countries are trying to corner the larger number of vaccines for themselves. Already at the beginning, we saw them acquiring medicines and supplies for their own people at the expense of each other. There's already a rush to reset global supply chains and raise trade barriers. And with all of this emphasis on more protectionism, more national interest, more self-reliance, and Mr. Modi's call for Atmanirbharta echoes that here in India, then I think that the desire to get more and more manufacturing and production chains back home or closer to home on the part of every country is going to give us a very deglobalized economy. And that, I think, will change the atmosphere in which we are all seeking to grow and prosper.
Great. That's going to be quite a different world next year then. Everyone is going to be very different from what we've had all these years from what you're saying. I personally think I'm an eternal optimist. I'm really hoping that this crisis and with the new administration coming in, it really will be positive. We have to be positive. I'm sure you'll agree that we have to continue to be positive. So let's wait and see what happens. So my next question, Pax Indica.
Right.
I've got the book here. Right.
Oh, delighted.
I wish I was with you because I would have got a signed copy of this. Sorry, I'm not able to see it. I do have a copy.
Thank you. Great. Right. Delighted.
Yeah. So I must confess that I haven't read it entirely, but yes, I have got the gist of what you're trying to say. Soft power. Right. So I think that's the essence of what you're saying. So what do you think we can do in India to leverage on the soft power? Because you keep talking about, that we have to take advantage of the soft power. We should really be, using it to our maximum advantage. How does India take advantage of, what's happening in the globe right now? Okay, I mean, I hate to say this. I was actually born in Hong Kong, so I'm a bit of a Chinese, a bit Chinese myself. Having said that. How can India take advantage of this sort of, anti-Chinese sentiment, if I can use that word? And
well, listen, all I can say is that when I wrote the book, of course, it was a very different India.
Yep.
Because soft power is essentially the power of attraction, power of culture, the power of the fact that, you see, hard power is what you actually exercise through military muscle, economic muscle. Hard power is the kind of traditional attributes of power that most people see. Whereas soft power is precisely what makes you attracted to others. So when people hear your country's name, they want to be with you, they want to like you, they want to associate themselves with you because it's so attractive. Now, India's soft power was based on some of these things. Of course, there were cultural products like everything from fashion to Indian cuisine to yoga, Ayurveda, Bollywood films, all of that. And there was also the extraordinary attraction of our values. We were such a remarkable example of the management of diversity in a multi-ethnic, multilinguistic, multicultural, multi-religious democracy. And no country in the world had our kind of diversity, and yet we were able to manage it together through cooperation, coexistence, and so on, that the world considered a remarkable success. When I say the world, I don't just mean the Western democracies. Even I've spoken to many African heads of state and government who are full of admiration. They said, when you look at India, we feel inspired that, if you can overcome all these challenges and diversities and succeed, so can we. That's why we look to you for leadership and guidance. That's the sort of feedback I was getting. I fear that a Western country with the usual regard for democracy and human rights is bound to feel that the old free pass that India used to get, whatever our failures were, whatever our limitations were, however bloody minded we might have been, the counter answer always was that we are a liberal democracy. Look at India. They're much more like us. They're not like China. Because they're so different and they've made such an effort to be democratic and to take people along and be so humane, we have to give them a pass on some of these other failures. Today, there's going to be a disinclination to give us a pass. And that's very worrying. I mean, for example, Mr. Biden in his campaign has made a big fuss about democracies. And he said that in his first few months in office, he intends to convene a global summit of democracies. And India was expected to be a star player in that. If India goes and people talk about what makes a democracy a viable democracy.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, that's what a lot of people think. And but on a side note, you know, our PM seems to be a rock star, to say the least. You know, the way, actually speaking, you know, to just going back to soft power, taking away all other items, you know, the way he's been marketing India globally. Personally, I think it's been phenomenal. But then we'll leave that for another day. Let me just indulge you on another question.
Sure.
We were talking about soft power, and then this, my son lives in London.
Okay.
And we keep debating about food. You know, we are big foodies in the family. And so what really took him and me by surprise is the number of Malayali restaurants, you know, Kerala restaurants all over London. I mean, you know, I was in school there many years ago. And at that time, you know, we have to go around, find the Appam restaurant, and then, you know, see where they're going to serve our Appam and fish curry or whatever. But now it's, you know, become a bit of a, you know, gourmet sort of food, and you find, you know, Kerala restaurants everywhere. I think if I read your book right, I mean, this is the soft power we're talking about, right?
That's part of it. That's very much part of it, and that's marvelous. I actually have mentioned that, in fact, that the Indian restaurants in the UK actually employ more people than the shipbuilding, coal mining, and iron and steel industries combined. So the empire has struck back as far as food is concerned, restaurants.
Yeah, so that's quite.
In fact, when the late Foreign Secretary Robin Cook was asked, what is the national dish of England? And people were wondering whether he would say haggis or Yorkshire pudding or steak and pie. He said curry tikka masala. Yeah, he said chicken tikka masala.
Tikka masala. Yeah. So let me just take you to the UN a bit now. I believe that you were there for almost 30 years. And
29, but yes, you're right.
29, 30, yeah. So just wanted to ask you this. You know, we've been following the UN SDG personally from the UEF. You know, we fully support the UN SDG. Our companies, we support the UN SDG. How relevant is it? I mean, is it something, you know, our Aam Aadmi, is he going to benefit with the UN SDG? How relevant is the United Nations for India, or should we even bother about the UN? Or
I mean, listen, the relevance is not the problem with the SDGs, because the governments of the world have settled on these goals themselves.
Right.
So they are speaking for their own Aam Aadmis, and their consensus, you know, we had the Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015. And when that 15-year period expired, a new set of targets was agreed by governments based on their experience of the previous 15 years, and that's the SDGs. And this goes on to be achieved till 2030. And it's all the classic things the Aam Aadmi is concerned about: poverty alleviation, illiteracy eradication, maternal health and mortality, public health generally, sanitation. I mean, all the classic development paradigms that affect human beings and human welfare are in the SDGs. So relevance is not the problem. They're very, very relevant. And what is more, they are made relevant by the fact that they're not conceived by some outside body somewhere in the sky. They're actually agreed upon after negotiation by governments. So there, the question to some degree is off. The question is, does the UN, SDGs or otherwise, does the UN directly affect the lives of ordinary people? I think it is true that in a very large country like India, the UN only becomes a sort of McKinsey of development. It can give you a consultancy role for the government and share some of the best practices around the world, give you some idea of what the global agenda is. But the UN doesn't get involved in working on the ground, some grassroots village level anymore. That is really left to the Indian government, the Indian agencies, Indian NGOs, and so on to do.
Right. So just staying on the UN a little bit.
Yeah.
29 years in the United Nations, right? So how does somebody who spends 29 years come back to Thiruvananthapuram, win the election, 3 terms? And I mean, sorry for asking this so bluntly, but how does somebody like you fit into the fabric of Kerala? I mean, I'm not able to fathom how that works, right? Was it a culture shock? Was it, for the voters, maybe? I don't know. Is it for you or for them? I don't know.
Yeah, no. In fact, there was multiple levels of culture shock because, in fact, my parents are from a different part of Kerala, Palakkad district, closer to that side of the Tamil Nadu border, whereas Thiruvananthapuram. But I chose Thiruvananthapuram to contest because it was a state capital, and I wrongly assumed that the more educated, well-read people might vote for me because of shall we say, my books had been translated into Malayalam. I was more likely to be familiar to more newspaper readers and so on. In fact, that turned out to be a different story. But coming back to this, so it was a culture shock in switching from America to India, within India, from the environs of Delhi or Mumbai or Calcutta, where I'd grown up, to Kerala, where I had never lived except on holidays, and within Kerala, so triple culture shock between the district I was familiar with, which was actually the one my parents and we as children would visit annually in Palakkad, and the city of Thiruvananthapuram, which I had only previously visited once before, like a tourist. So all of these were culture shocks. But you know what was interesting was that the question that you asked, which is entirely fair, was precisely the tactic that my opponents in the first election were principally the communists. Now my principal opponents are the BJP. But in those days, it was a communist-held seat. The 2 previous elections had been won by the Communist Party of India. And so they took the line, how can this man seek your votes? Who is he? He's only used to living in 3-piece suits and air-conditioned offices, and he is completely unfamiliar with your needs and your problems. How can he presume to represent you? And what is more, his Malayalam is atrocious. He hasn't spoken it properly for 30 years.
He's a Tamilian.
No, not a Tamil.
He's really a Tamilian.
They were more concerned that I was a New Yorker as far as they were. So I said to the people, because I had picked up adequate Malayalam in the course of annual holidays and so on. I said to people, listen, this is my background. First of all, I gave the lie to all the 3-piece suit, air-conditioned office stuff by being dressed as I comfortably am in a munda and jubba in South Indian clothes. The hottest days and hottest times of the hottest days and the hottest month of the year, because the election campaigns have been March, April in 2009 and 14. And therefore, those are the hottest months of the year. And so I said, listen, you can see that I am very comfortable talking to you, finding out your needs and problems. And you know what? They're right that my Malayalam isn't as good as theirs. I can't make these wonderful sort of rodomontade speeches in Sahitya Malayalam. But you know what? I have, as you can see from my talking to you, I have enough Malayalam to understand your needs, your hopes, your problems. And more important, I have the English and the Hindi needed to express them effectively in the national parliament.
Absolutely.
That kind of completely destroyed the argument against me, because it was very easy to point out that these fellows might be very comfortable in Kerala, but the job they were electing the MP for was to be done in Delhi.
Right.
And there I was bound to be more effective. And I'm pleased to say I won with a record majority, which I have been able to, the majority went down in the next election in the Modi wave. But in the current, the 2019 election, the most recent one, I was able once again to return to those levels of majority. So I'm pleased to say that there is a certain, shall we say, commitment to me and support for me on the part of the electorate. And I must say that I've become very comfortable in Thiruvananthapuram. I've already decided that when I think of a retirement, and I will have to start building a retirement home before too long, because I don't have one, it's going to be there, because I'm very comfortable there. I feel very accepted there now. And there's a lot of wonderful virtues to that lovely city. It's near the sea. It's got a pleasant enough climate. And at the same time, unlike a place like Kochi, it's not already choking and congested with traffic. It's still a manageable state capital, small town with 20-minute drive from almost anywhere in the city to the airport, to a hospital, to the port, etc. So though I'm trying to bring a lot of development to the place, and so population will grow and infrastructure will grow, at the same time, I think it's a very comfortable place to see out the rest of my innings in. So I'm very happy to say that I have now become a true Trivandrumite. I'm a Thiruvananthapuram Nivasi.
But Trivandrumite.
Absolutely.
Right. You must have frequented Villa Maya. It's one of my favorite restaurants.
It is. In fact, it's one of the best restaurants in the States and possibly in the country. So we go to Villa Maya quite often. I'm a regular there.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah. I love that restaurant as well. So we've got a lot of youth here watching us in today, Dr. Seshadharur. So what's your advice for them? Is this going to be? I've got this sort of belief that in the next 30 years, and of course you've been talking about the looters, right? And the fantastic speech that you gave in 2015 in Oxford. How can anybody forget that? Is the empire going to strike back? I personally really wish it does happen in the next 30 years. A position that we had, 500 years ago, 400 years ago, 1/3 of the global economy. Figures are saying that we may, reach that position again in the next 30 years. So what's in store for our youth? What do you think they should be doing? What should the youth in South India be doing, in India be doing, so that we really take advantage of this sort of mega wave which is coming in? Probably it wasn't there in your time, in my time, but in the next 30, 40 years, it certainly is going to be a wave. So what should they be doing?
I'd like to share your optimism. I'm sorry that you're asking the question on the very day in which it's been announced that we are officially in recession. So if we are going to get onto that kind of dramatic growth track, which had been expected and predicted at one time, then we are on the wrong path right now, and we'll have to do some really improved economic management on the part of the government to get us back on course. But let me just say that if indeed we are to go in the way in which you hope and I hope and most Indians would like to see our country prospering, I would say that the first and most important challenge is bound to be that we actually come up with economic policies that take advantage of the currents prevailing in the world. When it was globalization, that's one thing. In today's world, it may be a differently nuanced approach. Clearly, a lot of the future involves technological innovation, artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning. We can't afford to be behind the curve on that. Have to dramatically improve our education and skill levels. We have a demographic dividend potentially, because in the next 30 years that you mentioned, we will have the youngest and largest workforce in the world of people of working age, because already by next year, I think the studies show that we will have about 116 people in the job starting age group of 19 to 23, whereas China will only have 96 million people, 193 million people. So we will be way ahead of China in terms of this cohort that will grow up and work for the next 30 years. They'll only work effectively if we train, skill, and equip them to take advantage of the opportunities that the world offers and the world economy offers. So that's definitely something which I believe we need to do. And then finally, I would say that we also need a tremendous amount of flexibility on the part of our young people. There's a study from the Oxford Martin School that says that by 2030, 30% of the jobs that exist will be jobs that don't exist today. How do you prepare yourself for a job that doesn't exist today? What you do is you learn to think creatively, to think out of the box, to have a think in a problem-oriented way, learn to handle unfamiliar data, unfamiliar information, but manage to come on top of it. Because essentially, learning skills for yesterday's jobs is not going to give you any particular opportunity to do well in tomorrow's jobs. And that kind of flexibility, which is often not sufficiently present in our education system, is something that the young will have to really find and develop in themselves. Those are the skills that will be required to be successful in the unpredictable, perhaps even unimaginable world that they will be living in and growing up in the next 25, 30 years.
Brilliant. So I don't want to take any more of your time. MP Dr. Shashi Tharoor, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Half an hour is too short a time, as you can see, for somebody like you. I think we need a whole day to sit and discuss about things. And I sincerely hope that we'll be able to have you in one of our live events in the UEF. It'll be
in a post-COVID world.
In a post-COVID world, or even a summit with our education institutions where we've got lots of students. We'll talk about that at another time. But thank you so much. I really appreciate for having you taken the time, and I do look forward to meeting you sometime soon.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good speaking to you. All the best.
Pleasure. Thank you.